Hey everybody, Joey Mesa here. So in this video I'm going to be doing a complete overhaul on this gravel bike hub. That's going to include new bearings, freehub, overhaul, and everything else. So this particular hub is it's off a Bontrager wheel, just kind of a Trek House brand, and it's basically, I believe it to be manufactured by Formula. It has Formula bearings. Anyway, as far as I've got the cassette and the rotor off, so what we're going to do first is we've got on one end there's a little bearing cap that is threaded, and then this is the non-drive side. I've got it just clamped in. This would be pretty similar removal process to DT or lots of other cartridge bearing hubs. So basically what I did is just put it in the soft jaws, basically lift up a little bit with one side and then give it a little pop up with the other side, and then usually just come right off. So as you can see, there's a little hole on the one end of the axle. Sometimes there may be a hex key internally, but these threads are reversed, so we're turning it clockwise there to loosen the that outer cap off. So once we have that thing off, most of the time normally that free hub body will just slide right off of the hub there. But in the case of this one, it was the thing had gotten just lots of water and contamination inside there. So just kind of off. I worked it over for a while, but just off camera, I ended up finally getting it to break loose. So you can see there's quite a bit of I don't know, dirtiness. It's like a little bit of rust residue. I could see droplets of water laying on top of the grease on this dirty free hub body there. So some of the bearings definitely felt worse than others, but we went ahead and just replaced them all. So we'll get this cleaned up a little better. We can get a better look at everything. So that's free hub body. It's Formula bearing there. So looks like a 6802. So it looks like semi-decent bearing. This is my little blind bearing puller. So there's two bearings inside of this free hub body, and then there's a little spacer that basically rests between them. So it's difficult to get a good way to knock one of them out. So I've got my blind bearing puller here that I'm gonna put in on the basically we're going to move that outermost facing bearing on the drive side, I guess you could say, closest to the frame. So I've got my little blind puller. It's expanded into that bearing. So I'm just it's a steel free hub body, so I just kind of laid it on the vise there. It's not clamped down or anything, so just a couple smacks there and dislodge that bearing out of the hub shell, or the free hub body shell. So you can see the bearing, and then that's the little spacer there. It grabbed all of that together. So you can see inside the other bearing there, and there's a little clip that we're going to need to remove before we get the other bearing out. So you can kind of see, just as I'm undoing the little expansion piece there that expands into the bearing, it just, we got our bearing there and the little spacer. It's a LU designation on that bearing, so that orange side has a better seal. So that's how we're going to when we put the new ones in. It's a similar system there. So we got our little snap ring out, and just basically do the same thing on this side with the removing the inside bearing. Just expand our little blind bearing puller and knock it right out of there. Sometimes if you just have a punch and a hammer, you're definitely going to get rid of the bearings. You can just sometimes gradually push that the spacer off to the side just a little bit. It's doable that way, but you do risk damaging the spacer, kind of changing the shape of it, and may not be quite as precise later on. So on this one, we've got basically removing the two bearings in the hub shell. And so we've got basically an axle with a shoulder on it, and then we've got the two bearings there. So what I'm doing here first to start off is I'm just pushing on the drive side there on the actual end of the axle, and then it's just going to push that bearing on the non-drive side out with, along with the axle, so you can kind of see the two shoulders there where the bearings are going to actually rest. There's still one bearing there that's kind of on the drive side, basically sitting in the center of the hub. And if you have the ability to press the bearings out, that's it's always better than not hammering them out. I don't know, you just reduce the risk of damaging the hub shell or the axle or anything else. So I kind of cobbled this together. I've got a support on the outside edge of the hub shell, and then I'm tightening this. It's pushing the bearing from the inside out. Got just basically series of little spacers there, and then the correct size that you would use to press the bearing in. I'm just pressing it from the other side to push it out there. So we got that one out, got all our bearings out. Now it's just time to basically clean everything up and get it all reassembled. I've got just the axle here. I just wanted to do a quick kind of put the bearings where they would go, just kind of as a demonstration. I had an interesting conversation that's kind of ongoing on the GXP bottom bracket, and how on the non-drive side the bearing isn't really preloaded. It's just kind of sandwiched between two fixed points, which you'll see exactly on this particular system here. There's no actual preload per se on the bearings. They're just sandwiched between a series of spacers and end caps there. I mean, this end cap tightens on there counterclockwise to cinch it down, but it doesn't preload the bearing. It basically rests on the inside edge of the bearing, which in turn rests on the inside edge of the spacer, and just so forth. So there's basically 4 bearings that are sandwiched between a solid space there. So anyway, that's kind of just how it goes together. So we got our little paws here on a freehub body, so we're going to go ahead and take those out and get everything totally degreased and cleaned up. So there's always one little point there where you can see a break, and there's a little spring clip that kind of holds the paws in. So we'll start there. I'm just trying to be real careful not to damage the spring here, but basically if you can get a pick or something, or just pull one of the paws up, you can see where the end of the little spring clip is there. And so we're going to just carefully get these out. Try not to lose any of them. Like I lose one here down this little crack, and whoop, didn't go too far though, so not a big deal. Anyway, you can see the little spot there where that little paw rests, and the spring basically will just flips those little paws up to engage. So got everything cleaned up here, and we're just inspecting. You can see the kind of the wear mark or the witness mark where that paw's been pivoting. And typically this is what, on this particular type, what'll just dirtiness is what's going to kill these eventually. Dirtiness and just miles and such. So this little spring, one thing you want to look for when you're inspecting these, you'll get on a 3-paw system like this, you'll get 3 little spots where the spring starts to wear thin, and for one, it just loses material there, so it's not going to pop these paws up as high, but it just loses some of its I don't know, spring tension, I guess you could say. Sometimes these paws, they'll get the ends kind of chipped off. I mean, you can see again, some wear and such, but nothing too major on these. They should be, once cleaned up, they should be fine. You can see a little corrosion on the back sides there where that's got water and stuff. So anyway, these are the bearings I'm replacing them with. This one is I guess an IJK from Japan. It was in a rebuild kit for a DT Swiss hub, but it was the correct size. But it's got the RS seal. It's got a nice seal on the outside, and then these are the two bearings that go on the inside portion of the hub. They're a little larger. This is an Enduro bearing, ABEC 5. It does have the nicer seals on the other side. I just didn't flip that over. But anyway, kind of off camera, I pressed the first bearing in. You can see the orange seal there facing outward. These are the two, I guess, the two DT bearings there, the IJK bearings, whatever. So anyway, got that first bearing pressed in, and just gonna put our little clip back in here. Keep the whole system from basically stationary there. So pop that little clip in, and so you know, at this point, if there's, I don't have a like over the axle press, so sometimes that may be easier on a situation like this with you've got this little spacer in between. So you know, either like a little dummy axle or something that would hold that securely in place would be ideal. I didn't have anything like that, so just greasing up the bearings. You know, again, we got the orange seal facing outwards, which is your better, it's going to have a better seal to it. The ones on the inside are basically just, they're designed to be a lower friction, so there's really not anything that's going to, dirt or anything that would come from the inside out. So really want your good seals on the outside edges there where they can be potentially contaminated. So anyway, I'm just pressing this in just to the point where it's just faintly touching that spacer. I don't want to lock it all the way in place just yet, otherwise it's going to be difficult to position the free hub over the axle. So we'll cinch that. Basically, I'm going to final cinch it down with the actual little top hat piece there once we're putting the hub all together. So essentially we got this piece all put together, and we'll go ahead and put our paws in it, get it set aside for doing the final assembly on the hub. So there's different types of lubricant that you can use on these. A lot of guys like to use just mineral oil. A lot of times I'll use this Dumont-Tech free hub oil, but in this case, just by judging off how the bike was ridden, I'll go to some Fieldwood tenacious oil. A lot of times I'll see grease used on these. I don't know. I don't really like to use grease because it sometimes can be a little heavy, cause the paws to stick down and cause some slipping issues. But this Fieldwood stuff's about the thickest usually that I like to go. If you got a free hub that's really loud, you want to quiet it a little bit, the Fieldwood oil works pretty good for that. But you know, it just stays in place longer, maybe a little more impervious to water and such. So anyway, yeah, that's what I used on this case. So basically I got one pawl in, got the spring started, and basically I'm just gonna kind of wind it slowly around, kind of hold the paws in place. The first one's engaged, the second one's not, it's not quite in the groove, but it's holding the little paw in place while I can get this last one on. And from there you just slide the little clip down into the grooves, and you want to just test it, make sure those paws, all of them, snap back nice and freely. They're not getting stuck down, so we're good here. We'll set that aside and get the rest of the hub ready to go there. I'm just putting a film of grease inside where the bearings are gonna press in. You know, that's mainly just to facilitate easy installation and then easy removal when, you know. But you can see the gray side has the better seal. It says LLB and LLU, so the LU side is going to have the better seal. The black side is going to have a low friction seal. So you know, these bearings are basically what I had on hand, which I think in both cases it's going to be a better bearing than what was originally in the wheel there. So Here I'm pressing the drive side, I guess, bearing in first, just kind of reversal how we took the other one out. So we got that. Basically, you want to just press it in till you feel it stop there. So we've got our aluminum axle here. Got the two shoulders there, the little stops the bearings rest against. So just putting a nice coating of grease on all the spots where the bearings are going to ride, and we're just going to slip that in. You can see the little hole there that we use to adjust the lock nut or tighten it down or whatever. So anyway, that's the other enduro bearing, again gray side out, and we're just going to push that onto the little pad there. And so what I did here, I mean, ideally you want to use an over the axle type bearing press, which I don't have, so just in a pinch, this little Chris King cut press that was for 1.125", it bit pretty much perfectly just inside the hub, but over, contacted the outside edge of the bearing shell there, and then I just kind of had to cobble together, as that's pushing through on the other side, I just had to cobble together a series of spacers to give that axle room to push up through there, so it didn't, basically the bearing's pushing through and it's going to rest against the stops, but that axle has to be able to float through there, and so it's kind of my first attempt. I didn't have quite enough spacers, so the axle butted up against the end of the red piece there, and so you can see there's a little bit of side play. So basically just added couple extra spacers. Took me a couple tries to get it dialed in, but anyway, so yeah, it's getting closer on this attempt, but that was the final, basically a couple Park crown race setting tools on the other side, just that were hollow, that fit up against the hub shell and everything else. So we got this assembly all in, and now we're just going to put our freehub body in. Got this first little spacer piece that goes basically butts between the two bearing ends, and then from here we can just install our freehub body. Just kind of weaseling the little spacer. This is the part that you want that to be able to either be centered with the bearings or whichever. I just kind of push down and rotate backwards. So we're going to turn the lock nut there counterclockwise to get it all cinched together. Got my screwdriver in, and basically just want to turn that to where it snugs down in place. That was kind of pushing the final seating of that drive side bearing. So got that all together. Feels super smooth now. Nice smooth ratcheting action there, and a little stiction-y from those brand new bearings, but overall they spun really smooth. It's one of those things, you put your finger on the edge of the skewer or whatever, you can feel a lot of times on one that's really rough, you can definitely feel it kind of reverberating through the frame there. But this one came out really nice. So yeah, hopefully you found the video helpful. Subscribe to my channel if you're not already a subscriber. I'm always putting videos out like this, generally weekly. So anyway, that's gonna do it for this one. See you guys next time.